It was a cold morning when Pam walked into a small cafe downtown. The wind had been sharp that day, tugging at her coat as she crossed the street. Her eyes were tired, her hair loosely tied back. She hadn't bothered with much makeup or fancy clothes, just a plain gray sweater and jeans. To most people, she looked like any ordinary woman, someone running errands or stopping for a cup of coffee before work. She found a small table near the window, the one where sunlight usually landed in the mornings. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and sweet pastries. For a moment, Pam smiled softly. She liked this place because it was quiet and didn't remind her of the fast, demanding world outside. Here, she could breathe, or at least try to. As she waited for the waiter, she noticed a group of people at a table across the room. There were 4 of them, laughing loudly, dressed sharply for what looked like a business meeting. Their laughter filled the cafe, mixing with the soft music in the background. Pam didn't pay much attention until she heard a comment that made her pause. "Some people really should look in the mirror before stepping out," one of the women from the group said with a smirk. Her voice was loud enough for others to hear. The others chuckled. Pam kept her eyes on her menu, pretending she hadn't heard, but her hands felt cold. The same woman leaned closer to her friends and whispered something, glancing at Pam's table again. This time their laughter was more obvious. The waiter noticed too, but he stayed silent, unsure how to react. Pam exhaled slowly. She had dealt with far worse in her life: harsh interviews, public scrutiny, endless criticism. But what always stung the most were small, unkind moments like this. Moments when strangers decided your worth just by how you looked that day. The waiter came to her table, offering a gentle smile. "Good morning, ma'am. What can I get for you?" Pam smiled back. "Just a black coffee, please. And maybe a croissant." "Right away," he said kindly. As he left, the group at the other table continued their talk, but it was clear they were still whispering about her. Pam tried to ignore them. She reached into her bag, pulled out a few papers, and began reading. But their voices kept pulling her attention. "Look at her shoes," the man said quietly, laughing. "Looks like she's had them for years." Pam didn't flinch. She just folded her papers neatly and looked out the window. The cars passed by. People hurried across the street, and the world outside seemed kinder than the people inside this cafe. When her coffee arrived, she thanked the waiter. He hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He just nodded and walked away. Pam took a sip. The warmth of the cup comforted her hands, but inside she felt a quiet ache. It wasn't about pride. It wasn't even about the rude words. It was about how easy it was for people to judge without knowing. The door of the cafe opened again and a breeze swept in. The woman from the loud group got up to grab more napkins, walking right past Pam's table. As she turned, her elbow knocked into Pam's cup. Hot coffee spilled over the edge, staining Pam's sweater and papers. "Oh, watch where you're sitting," the woman snapped instantly. Pam blinked, surprised. It's all right," she said softly, trying to clean the mess with a napkin. The woman rolled her eyes. "You really shouldn't keep your things all over the table." Everyone nearby had turned to watch. The cafe went quiet except for the sound of napkins rustling. Pam's heart pounded, but she forced a small smile. "It's fine. Accidents happen." The waiter hurried over. "Ma'am, I can get you another coffee." "No charge," Pam shook her head. "It's okay. Thank you." The group at the table whispered again, and one of them laughed. Pam heard the faint sound of someone saying, "She's too calm. Maybe she's used to being treated like that." That comment stayed with her for a moment. She thought about all the times she had stayed quiet while people underestimated her, all the times she had to prove herself twice as hard just because she was a woman in power. But she didn't say a word now, not because she was weak, but because she knew silence sometimes said more than anger ever could. A few minutes later, the waiter returned to clean up the spilled coffee. He bent down and said softly, "I know who you are, ma'am." Pam looked up, surprised. "Do you?" He smiled slightly. "Yes, my mother talks about you all the time. She said you changed her life." Pam's eyes softened. "Your mother?" He nodded. "She was one of the people you helped with that legal aid program a few years ago." She never forgot. For a moment, Pam felt warmth return to her chest. "I'm glad she's doing well," she said quietly. "She is," he replied. Then he looked at the group who had mocked her, shook his head slightly, and went back to the counter. Pam took a breath and returned to her papers. She had learned long ago that kindness didn't always come with applause. Sometimes it came quietly, from people who remembered what others forgot. Outside, the sunlight began to brighten. The cafe was half full now. More people coming in for their morning drinks. The laughter from the corner table had softened. Maybe they were tired, or maybe they had realized their words had lost their fun. Pam sat still, finishing what was left of her croissant. In her mind, she thought of the meeting she had later that day, a meeting that would decide a major policy. Most people didn't know she was the president now. It wasn't something she flaunted when she was out in public. She preferred moments like this, quiet, real, and unfiltered. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen but didn't answer. For a second, she thought about how strange it was that the world could respect you in headlines but forget you in person. Fame didn't protect you from judgment. It only made you see how fragile people's kindness could be. At the corner table, one of the men laughed again. "She's still here," he muttered. "Guess she's got nowhere better to be." Pam slowly stood up, collected her papers, and walked to the counter to pay. The waiter looked nervous. "You really don't have to pay, ma'am." "About the spill, it's fine," she interrupted with a small smile. "You've already been kind enough." As she handed him the money, the door opened once more. A young man in a suit rushed inside, holding a folder. He looked around quickly until his eyes landed on Pam. "Madam President," he said in a breathless voice. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you're needed at the briefing." The entire cafe froze. The group that had mocked her stared, mouths half open. The woman who spilled the coffee went pale. The young man looked confused, realizing too late that he had said it out loud in front of everyone. Pam just nodded calmly. "It's all right," she said. "I was just finishing up." The man held out the folder nervously. "The press is already gathering. We need your signature before they start." Pam took the folder, signed it carefully, and handed it back. The cafe remained silent. You could hear the faint hum of the coffee machine, but no one spoke. Every person who had laughed now looked down, avoiding her eyes. Pam smiled politely at the waiter. "Thank you again for your kindness." He nodded quickly, his eyes wide. "Of course, ma'am." Pam turned toward the door. As she passed the table where the group sat, they shifted awkwardly, pretending to check their phones. One of them whispered a weak, "I'm sorry," but Pam didn't stop. She simply nodded and walked out. The cold air outside met her face again, but this time it didn't feel so harsh. She walked toward her car, parked at the corner, her assistant opening the door for her. As she stepped inside, the young man handed her another document to review. "Rough morning?" he asked quietly. Pam looked out the window at the cafe behind them. Through the glass, she could still see the people sitting there, stunned by what they had just learned. She smiled faintly. "Not rough," she said. "Just real." The car pulled away slowly. Inside, Pam leaned back and closed her eyes. She thought about how fragile respect could be, and how quickly it returned once people knew your title. But that didn't matter to her. What mattered was how she carried herself when no one else knew who she was. She smiled to herself, remembering her words from years ago, something she once said to a friend. "Power isn't what people give you. It's how you choose to stand when they take it away." The morning had started with whispers and laughter, but it ended with silence. And in that silence, Pam found something far more powerful than revenge. She found proof that dignity never needs to shout to be heard. Pam sat quietly in the back seat of the car as it moved through the busy morning traffic. The city looked alive, filled with noise, movement, and energy. Yet inside the car it was calm. Her assistant, sitting beside her, scrolled through his tablet, giving short updates about the meeting that awaited her. "They're already at the building," he said softly. "The press is outside too. Everyone's waiting for your statement." Pam nodded but didn't speak. Her mind was still halfway in the cafe. She could still hear the laughter, the whispers, and the sudden silence when her title was revealed. It wasn't anger she felt now, it was reflection. How quickly people's behavior changed once they realized who she was. The car stopped at a red light. Outside, a street musician played a soft tune on a violin. A little girl dropped a coin into his case, smiling. The man nodded gratefully. Pam watched quietly, her lips curving into a faint smile. Moments like that reminded her of something she often forgot, that there were still people in the world who gave without expecting anything in return. The light turned green, and the car rolled forward again. When they reached the government building, cameras were already flashing. Reporters stood behind barriers shouting questions. Pam stepped out of the car, her calm expression hiding the tiredness she felt. Security guided her toward the main entrance. She walked steadily, her coat swaying slightly in the wind. Inside, the noise disappeared. The tall marble hallway felt quiet, except for the sound of her heels clicking against the floor. A few staff members greeted her respectfully. Some smiled warmly. Others stood straighter as she passed. In the conference room, several senior advisors were already seated. Papers covered the long table, and a large digital screen showed charts and numbers. "Good morning, Madam President," one of them said as she entered. "Good morning," Pam replied, taking her seat. "Let's get started." The meeting began with updates: economic numbers, security matters, and upcoming policy deadlines. Pam listened carefully, nodding now and then, asking short questions. Her calm authority filled the room. But halfway through, as one advisor presented a report about public perception and trust, Pam's mind wandered for a moment. She thought again about that cafe, the way those people looked at her, the way they laughed so easily. If ordinary people could turn so quickly from kindness to mockery, what did that say about society? She stopped the speaker gently. "Can I ask something?" "Yes, Madam President," the man said. "What do people think leadership really looks like?" She asked quietly. "Do they think it's about suits, speeches, and cameras? Or do they see it in everyday life, in how we treat one another when no one is watching?" The room went silent for a moment. An older advisor smiled softly. "Most people forget that part, ma'am. They see power as something above them, not beside them." Pam nodded. "That's the problem," she said thoughtfully. "We forget to lead with empathy. We forget that respect isn't something given to titles. It's something we owe each other as human beings." The room remained still, the weight of her words settling quietly. After the meeting, Pam walked toward her private office. Her assistant followed, still holding his tablet. "You have the press statement in 15 minutes, he reminded her. "I'll be there," she said, glancing out the window. Down below, she could see the crowd gathering near the gates, reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers. To them, she was a symbol of authority, someone unreachable. But to herself, she was just a person who still liked morning coffee, who sometimes felt lonely, who still got hurt by careless words. Her assistant hesitated before speaking again. "Is everything okay, ma'am? You've been quiet since the cafe." Pam turned toward him with a small smile. "You noticed?" He nodded. "Yes, you don't usually let small things bother you." She leaned back against the desk. "It wasn't what they said. It's what it meant. People judge so fast. They think a person's value is in what they wear or how confident they look. But I've met people in old coats who carry more dignity than some in expensive suits." He nodded slowly. "That's true." She smiled faintly. "I guess I just needed the reminder." A knock on the door interrupted them. One of her senior aides stepped in. "They're ready for you, ma'am." Pam straightened her jacket and walked out. As she approached the podium outside, cameras began flashing again. The crowd buzzed with energy. She stood behind the microphones, looking at the faces in front of her, some eager, some skeptical, some simply curious. She began to speak about leadership, growth and responsibility, her tone steady but warm. Every word came from a place of sincerity. She didn't talk about the cafe, but everything she said carried its echo. She spoke about how people needed to see beyond appearances, how empathy was not weakness but strength. After the speech, reporters asked questions. She answered with patience, never losing her calm. When it was over, she thanked everyone and stepped back. The applause was polite but genuine. Later that day, when she returned home, the house was quiet. She liked it that way. She changed into something more comfortable and made herself tea. As she sat on the couch, she thought about the day again. The laughter, the silence, the meeting, and the speech. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She opened it curiously. It was from the waiter at the cafe. It read, "Ma'am, I hope I didn't overstep by saying I knew you. I just wanted to thank you again. My mother cried when I told her you remembered her." Pam smiled softly and typed back, "You didn't overstep. Tell your mother I remember her strength, not her struggle. Be proud of her." She put the phone down and took a sip of her tea. Outside, the city lights blinked like quiet stars. She thought about the people at the cafe again, wondering if they were still thinking about that morning. Part of her hoped they were, Not because she wanted them to feel guilty, but because maybe, just maybe, it would change the way they treated someone else in the future. The next morning, Pam arrived at her office earlier than usual. Her secretary was surprised to see her so soon. "Good morning, ma'am," she said, handing her the day's schedule. "Morning," Pam replied. "Any news?" "Yes," the secretary said. "A cafe owner called earlier. He wanted to thank you for visiting. Apparently word spread about what happened, and he said many customers have been more polite since then." Pam raised her eyebrows, slightly amused. "Really?" "Yes. He said it's like everyone's suddenly remembering their manners." Pam chuckled lightly. "That's good news then." Throughout the day, she met with more people, signed documents, reviewed reports, and discussed new plans. But in every conversation, her tone was softer. Her words carried warmth. She wasn't just thinking about policies anymore. She was thinking about people. During a break, she took a walk through the hallway that led to a small courtyard. A janitor was sweeping leaves near the fountain. When he saw her, he quickly stood upright, looking nervous. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said quickly. Pam smiled. "Good afternoon. You can keep working. I just needed some fresh air." He hesitated. "It's an honor to see you here, ma'am. I never thought I'd meet you in person." She laughed softly. "You just did," he smiled shyly. "My wife says you're an inspiration. She said you make people like us feel seen." Pam's smile deepened. "Tell your wife she's the reason I do what I do." He nodded gratefully. As she walked away, she felt lighter somehow. These small encounters, humble, genuine, were what reminded her that leadership wasn't about power. It was about presence. That evening, when she was alone again in her office, she looked out at the city skyline. The sun was setting, painting the buildings in gold and orange. She thought about how life had a way of teaching lessons when you least expected them. Yesterday, she had been mocked for looking ordinary. Today, she was being praised for showing grace. But to her, both days were the same. Both showed how quickly people could change, how fragile opinions were. She whispered softly to herself, "It's not what they see when they look at you. It's who you choose to be when they don't." Her reflection in the window looked calm, content, and strong. The world outside would keep judging, keep talking, but she had already learned the only opinion that truly mattered was the one she carried in her heart. As the lights in her office dimmed, Pam packed up her papers and prepared to go home. Her driver waited outside. She glanced one last time at the folder on her desk, the one labeled Leadership Through Empathy. She smiled as she closed it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new faces, and maybe even new moments of judgment. But she knew now that no matter what happened, she would keep walking the same way, quietly, confidently, and with grace that no insult could ever take away. The morning sun filtered through the large glass windows of Pam's office, casting long golden lines across her desk. She had been there since early dawn, reading reports, highlighting notes, and sipping her first coffee of the day. But her mind was elsewhere. Every few minutes, she'd find herself staring out at the city below, watching people hurry to work, some carrying bags, others holding hands, some walking alone. She wondered how many of them carried invisible stories, how many wore tired faces not because they were weak, but because they had been fighting battles no one could see. That thought had been following her since that day at the cafe. It had changed something deep inside her, something subtle but strong. The knock on her door broke her thoughts. Her assistant stepped in, holding a tablet. "Ma'am, your next meeting starts in 10 minutes, he said softly. "It's about the new community outreach program." Pam nodded. "Good. Let's go over the proposal one more time." He handed her the tablet and she scrolled through the notes. The plan was to visit local neighborhoods, small schools, and centers that rarely got government attention. Pam wanted to meet people directly, to hear their problems, not just read about them in reports. "I want this to be real," she said firmly. "Not just cameras and speeches. Real conversations? Real stories," her assistant smiled. "That's why people trust you, ma'am. You actually listen." Pam looked up. "People stop trusting leaders when they stop feeling seen. I don't ever want to be that kind of leader." 10 minutes later, she was walking toward the conference hall. A few members of her team followed behind, carrying folders and laptops. Inside the room, a small group of community representatives had gathered. They stood up respectfully as she entered. "Good morning," Pam greeted them warmly. "Please sit down. Let's talk." The meeting lasted over an hour. People shared concerns about local schools, healthcare, and job programs. Pam listened carefully to each person, asking questions, taking notes by hand instead of letting someone else do it. She believed writing things down herself helped her remember not just the facts but the feelings behind them. At one point, a woman stood up, her voice shaking slightly. "Madam President," she said, "we don't ask for much. We just want to feel like our lives matter as much as anyone else's." Pam's heart tightened. She nodded slowly. "They do. I promise you that. And I'll prove it, not with words but with actions." When the meeting ended, people shook her hand and thanked her. Some took photos, others just smiled, grateful for the small attention she had given them. As she walked out of the hall, her assistant whispered, "You look tired, ma'am. You should rest." Pam smiled faintly. "I'll rest when people stop needing help." Later that afternoon, she visited a small public school on the edge of the city. The teachers were surprised but overjoyed to see her. Children ran up to her, excited but shy, handing her little drawings they had made in class. "Is this me?" Pam asked, holding up a stick figure drawing with a crown and a blue dress. A little girl nodded proudly. "You're the president, right?" Pam laughed softly. "Yes, I am. But I don't wear crowns," the girl grinned. "You should. You're nice." Pam's laughter filled the small classroom, and even the teachers smiled. She spent the next hour sitting with the children, asking them about their dreams. One boy said he wanted to be a pilot. Another said a doctor. The little girl with the drawing said she wanted to be kind like you. Those words stayed with Pam long after she left the school. On the ride back to her office, she stared out the car window, watching the city fade into evening colors. The driver said nothing, sensing she was lost in thought. When she reached her office again, the sun had almost set. She walked straight to her desk, where a new stack of folders awaited her signature. Her assistant entered quietly and placed a cup of tea beside her. "Long day," he said softly. Pam smiled. "A good one, though," he hesitated. "There's something else, ma'am." A journalist called. He said he wanted to do a piece about you. Something personal. About who you are behind the office. Pam raised her eyebrows slightly. "Personal?" "Yes." He said it's about humility. How people in power forget what it means to be ordinary. He wants to talk to you about that cafe story. Pam froze for a second. "The cafe?" "Yes," her assistant said quietly. "Apparently someone filmed a bit of it. It's been shared online. People are talking about how calm and kind you were even when others were being rude." Pam leaned back in her chair. "Of course they filmed it," she murmured. He looked worried. "Do you want to deny it? We can have the communications team handle it before it spreads too far." She shook her head. "No, let them talk. Maybe it's good they saw it. Maybe people need to see that kindness doesn't mean weakness." The assistant nodded slowly, still unsure. "Then should I schedule the interview?" Pam thought for a moment, then smiled. "Yes, but tell him I'll only do it if we meet somewhere simple. No fancy lights, no makeup, no setup. Just a real conversation." The assistant made a note and left. Later that week, Pam met the journalist in a quiet park near the city's old library. The wind was cool and leaves rustled softly around them. The man had a small recorder and a notebook. "Thank you for agreeing to this, Madam President," he said respectfully. "Just call me Pam," she replied. "We're not in the office," he smiled. "All right, Pam, I wanted to talk about that moment at the cafe. People were surprised by how you reacted. Most people would have gotten angry." Pam looked out toward the lake before answering. "I've been angry before," she said quietly. "But anger never fixes anything. Those people didn't know who I was, and that's fine. It's not their job to know, but it is everyone's job to be kind." The journalist nodded, writing her words down. "Do you think they learned from it?" "I hope so," Pam said. "But even if they didn't, I learned something that day too. I learned that no matter how much you've achieved, people will still try to measure your worth by what they see, not who you are. And that's okay as long as you don't start believing them." They talked for nearly an hour. Pam shared simple, honest thoughts about leadership, life, and humility. There were no rehearsed lines, no political tone. Just truth. When the interview was published 2 days later, it spread quickly online. The title read, "The President Who Stayed Silent When Others Mocked Her." Thousands of people shared it. Some said they cried reading her words. Others said it made them rethink how they treated people around them. Pam didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. All she wanted was to remind people that respect and decency should never depend on status. A few days later, her assistant entered her office again. "Ma'am, we got hundreds of letters this week," he said, carrying a large box. "Most of them are thank you notes from ordinary people. Some are from schools. A few even from cafe owners saying they learned something." Pam smiled warmly. "That's good. Maybe that moment wasn't such a bad one after all." He nodded. It wasn't. It became a lesson for everyone. That night, Pam sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, reading some of the letters. One came from a young woman who wrote, "I used to laugh at people without knowing their story. But after hearing about you, I realized how wrong that was. I'm trying to change now." Pam read it twice, her eyes soft. She folded the letter gently and placed it in a small wooden box where she kept personal mementos, photos, notes and reminders of why she did what she did. Outside, the city lights shimmered again, and the world went on with its noise and pace. But inside her home, it was peaceful. She thought about how strange life was. How one simple morning, one spilled cup of coffee, and a few cruel words had turned into something much bigger. A story that made people think twice before judging. Pam smiled to herself. The world would always have its critics, its doubters, and its cold voices. But she had learned something they hadn't. When you stay true to your character, even in silence, your grace can speak louder than their words ever could. She turned off the lights, ready to rest, her heart calm. Tomorrow would bring another day, another challenge, another chance to lead with kindness. And she knew now more than ever that no matter where life placed her, at a cafe, in an office, or before millions, her strength would always come from the same place, her humanity. The morning was peaceful when Pam stepped out onto the balcony of her home. The air smelled fresh after the night's light rain, and the garden below glistened with dew. She stood quietly for a few minutes, watching the world wake up. Birds hopped across the grass, and the sound of distant traffic slowly filled the still air. It was her favorite time of day, the brief silence before everything began moving again. Her assistant had told her earlier that the interview she gave in the park was still spreading online. Every news outlet, blog, and social media feed seemed to be talking about her calmness that day in the cafe. She hadn't expected that. She had thought the story would fade quickly, like most things do. But it didn't. It kept growing. She walked back inside, picked up her cup of tea, and sat down at the kitchen table. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages from colleagues, news updates, and people she hadn't heard from in years. Everyone had something to say. Some admired her grace. Others questioned why she stayed silent in the face of insult. But Pam didn't feel the need to explain herself again. She knew why she did what she did, and that was enough. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. Her assistant stepped in, holding a folder. "Good morning, ma'am. Sorry to bother you at home, but there's something you should see." Pam gestured for him to sit. "What is it?" He placed the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were printed pages, letters, emails, and screenshots from online posts. "These are from people across the country," he said. "They've been writing in since your interview. Some say you inspired them to treat others better. A few teachers said they shared your story with their students." Pam picked up one of the letters. It was from a woman who worked as a cashier. The letter read, "I used to feel invisible. People would talk down to me every day, but after hearing your story, I remembered that kindness isn't weakness. I started smiling again even when people were rude. Thank you for reminding me of my worth." Pam read the words slowly, her eyes soft. "These are beautiful," she whispered. Her assistant smiled. "They are. You've started something, ma'am." Pam leaned back in her chair, lost in thought. She hadn't set out to start anything. She just wanted to get coffee that morning. But maybe that was the point. Sometimes the smallest moments carried the biggest messages. That afternoon, she attended a meeting at the presidential office. The discussion was about the upcoming national event, a charity program that supported young women who wanted to start their own businesses. It was something Pam had been passionate about for years. As she entered the conference room, everyone stood. She waved them down gently. "Please sit. Let's begin." The presentation started, showing graphs and numbers. But midway through, one of the younger staff members, nervous but brave, raised her hand. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say something. I saw your interview online. It made me realize that even in power, you stayed kind. That really changed how I see leadership." The room went quiet for a moment. Pam smiled at her. "Thank you. Kindness doesn't disappear with power, it should grow with it. If it doesn't, then power means nothing." The young woman nodded, her face lighting up with admiration. After the meeting, as Pam walked out, her communications director hurried over. "Ma'am, a community college has invited you to speak next week. They said the students want to hear about empathy and leadership." Pam agreed instantly. "Yes, let's do it." A week later, she arrived at the college auditorium. Hundreds of students filled the seats, their energy buzzing through the air. As she stepped onto the stage, applause erupted. She waved lightly, smiling. When the room quieted, she began to speak, not as a president, but as a person. "I wasn't always treated kindly," she said softly, "and I haven't always reacted perfectly either. But I've learned that what truly defines you is how you behave when people underestimate you." She told them the story of the cafe. The crowd listened closely, silent except for the occasional sigh. She didn't mention any names or shame anyone. Instead, she talked about grace, patience, and self-respect. "When you stay calm in the face of insult, you don't look weak," she said. "You show strength that comes from within. Anyone can shout. It takes real power to stay peaceful." When she finished, the students stood and clapped. Some even had tears in their eyes. Afterward, a young man approached her with a shaky smile. "Ma'am, I used to be one of those people who laughed at others to feel important," he admitted. "But not anymore. You made me see how wrong that was." Pam touched his shoulder lightly. "It's never too late to be kind," she said. As she left the auditorium, she felt something warm in her chest, a mix of gratitude and hope. Maybe her quiet moment of grace in that cafe had turned into a spark for something bigger. The following days grew busier. Pam's schedule filled with events, meetings, and interviews. But amid all of it, she made time to visit small places, local shelters, women's centers, schools. Everywhere she went, people mentioned her story. Some thanked her. Others shared their own experiences of being judged unfairly. One afternoon, while visiting a youth center, an older woman approached her. She looked humble, wearing simple clothes and carrying a worn-out handbag. "Madam President," she said, her voice trembling, "I was one of the people at that cafe." Pam paused, surprised. The woman looked nervous, her eyes wet. "I was there that morning," the woman continued. "I didn't say anything cruel, but I laughed when others did. I'm ashamed of that. I didn't know who you were, and it shouldn't have mattered. I wanted to say I'm sorry." Pam's heart softened instantly. She reached out, taking the woman's hands gently. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "But you don't need to apologize. You already learned the lesson, and that's what matters." Tears filled the woman's eyes. "You could have humiliated us that day, but you didn't. I'll never forget that." Pam smiled warmly. "We all make mistakes. What's important is that we grow from them." As the woman walked away, Pam felt a quiet peace settle inside her. Forgiveness wasn't about words. It was about releasing weight. That evening, when Pam returned home, the city lights twinkled like reflections of her thoughts. She sat by the window sipping tea. Her assistant called to update her on the next day's schedule, but she barely heard. Her mind was on the woman from the cafe. Life had a strange way of coming full circle. A few weeks later, Pam stood in front of the nation again, giving a speech at a charity gala. She wore a simple dress, her expression calm and graceful. The cameras were everywhere, but she wasn't thinking about them. She was thinking about the people watching, the ones sitting at home, maybe feeling invisible, maybe feeling judged. She spoke slowly, her voice sincere. The world doesn't always reward kindness right away, but it remembers it. It changes people in ways we can't see. The way we treat others says more about us than our titles ever will. The audience listened in silence. Many nodded, some smiled, others wiped their eyes. When the event ended, a journalist asked her, "Ma'am, do you ever wish you had spoken up that day instead of staying silent?" Pam thought for a moment. "No," she said softly, "because if I had shouted, no one would have listened." But silence made them hear something louder, the sound of their own conscience. Her words spread again, appearing in articles, headlines, and videos across the internet. People quoted her speech, teachers used it in lessons, and even community groups discussed it in workshops. What began as a moment of public shaming had become a lesson in dignity for millions. That night, as Pam walked through the quiet halls of her home, she paused in front of a framed quote she had kept for years. It read, "Be kind even when no one's watching." She smiled, remembering all that had happened. She realized now that true leadership didn't come from power or recognition. It came from the courage to stay gentle in a hard world. Pam turned off the lights and looked out over the city one last time before bed. The world outside still had its noise, its chaos, its flaws, but she felt hope. Because as long as even one person chose kindness, there was still light left in the world, she whispered softly to herself. Sometimes the smallest act of grace can become the loudest voice of change. And with that, she smiled and walked away from the window, her heart peaceful, knowing she had turned one ordinary morning into a story that would remind people, again and again, that humanity still mattered.